With the 1,000-year Blood War arc of Bleach just a couple of weeks away at the time of recording, I thought this was a great chance for us to all have a bit of a catch-up. Now, even anime-only viewers are probably aware at this point, thanks to marketing and trailers, that the villains of the 1,000-year Blood War arc of Bleach are none other than the Quincy themselves, a race believed to have been destroyed 200 years ago. Yet it seems have somehow survived. Now, this video won't be going into spoiler territory for the 1,000-year Blood War arc at all. Instead, it's designed to serve as something of an introduction or a recap to the Quincy race in general. Now, despite not being a formidable force in the world of Bleach anymore, the Quincy have managed to maintain a consistent presence in the story, thanks to the fact that one of Ichigo's best friends, Uryu Ishida, is also one of the last remaining Quincy in the world of Bleach. And so this video will be focusing on the Quincy race as a whole, their history, and the story of the Ishida family running right up till the start of the 1,000-year Blood War arc. However, if you want something that does dive a little bit into the 1,000-year Blood War arc while still trying to remain as spoiler-free as possible for anime-only viewers, I did recently put out a video looking at the major villains of the 1,000-year Blood War arc, so if you haven't seen that and you want to, I implore you to go and do that as well. However, before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week, and to stay up to date with all the uploads on this channel once the Bleach anime begins airing. And if you like the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support the channel, and if you want to take that support another step further, I do have a Patreon as well, where you can get videos like this one early, and you can support me for as little as $1 a month. To everyone who is currently doing that, as always, I just want to say an enormous thank you to each and every one of you. I really do appreciate it. So, to begin with, who or what are the Quincy? Well, first and foremost, the Quincy are a race of spiritually aware humans. That's right, these guys are actually still alive. Unlike the Shinigami, who are of course spirits crossing over from the Soul Society, the Quincy, those that are left anyway, are very much living and breathing beings in the human world. And much like the Shinigami, they can also see spirits. They can see hollows and they can see pluses. The name Quincy literally means monk of destruction, and we see this brought to life in a couple of different ways. The Quincy bring with them numerous religious and Christian motifs, particularly in the outfits that they wear, and the destruction element comes from the fact that, unlike Shinigami, Quincy exist to purge hollows completely from existence, wiping them from the fabric of the world itself. Now, the Quincy exist to be the polar opposite of the Shinigami, the complete contrast of the Shinigami in almost every single way, and it's this ideological matter of whether or not a hollow should be purged, or if it deserves redemption at all and should instead be erased from existence, that is the major point of contention between these two races. In this rich world of spirits, the Quincy exist as exorcists designed to remove them from existence entirely. This major ideological difference between the Quincy and the Shinigami of whether or not hollows deserve redemption, deserve saving, is the key crux in the conflict that these two races have nearly always had. And this idea stems from the fact that it's the very balance of the world that's at stake here. The Shinigami, originally known as balancers, exist to do just that, to ensure that the balance, the stability of the universe, of all of the worlds, remains intact, and that balance is generated through a carefully regulated flow of souls. To put it very briefly, you obviously have the human world where people live and breathe, and the afterlife, the Soul Society and Waco Mundo. When somebody dies in the human world, it's a Shinigami's job to ensure that their spirit finds passage to the afterlife through a ritual act known as Konso. By doing this, that spirit is regulated and passed over into the Soul Society as it should be. When someone then dies in the Soul Society, their spirit is reincarnated back in the human world, and as you can see, it's a cycle that is supposed to continue endlessly. This is the Shinigami's main job as the balancers of the universe. This balance is very, very delicate, and were the flow of souls to tip unfavourably in one particular direction, the consequences could be absolutely dire. Enter the Quincy, a race that see fit to act outside of the jurisdiction of the Shinigami and take on hollows as they see fit, which, as I mentioned earlier, involves completely obliterating their souls and giving them no chance for redemption or resurrection. By doing so, by completely removing a hollow's spirit as opposed to allowing it to be cleansed of its sins and instead go to the Soul Society, these spirits are being totally removed from the equation, causing a dangerous imbalance in the universe. Essentially, by wiping out hollows in the human world with reckless abandon, the Quincy are causing the balance to be shifted, and what this means is that the barriers between the worlds will eventually totally break down, causing the afterlife to come splashing into the human world, mixing the two together in a chaotic mess of life and death, which you've got to admit sounds pretty bad. The Quincy, however, staunchly believe it is their right to dispose of hollows as they see fit, and not to be effectively governed by the Shinigami. And it's not just their ideologies and their beliefs on how hollows should be treated that the Quincy and the Shinigami differ on. In fact, they are contrasted in almost every way. Where the Shinigami wear Japanese black shihakusho, the Quincy wear pearly angelic white tunics of more Western inspiration. And where the Shinigami utilize their Zanpakuto swords in order to defeat hollows, Quincy instead use bows and arrows. Although there is word that that might be somewhat outdated. The most important symbol to the Quincy is that of the Quincy Zeichen, and Kubo uses a German motif for the Quincy, much like how he uses other languages and cultures for the other races in the series. Japanese for the Shinigami, Spanish for the Hollows and the Urankar, and British for the Fullbringers. The Quincy cross is perhaps the most important piece of iconography for the Quincy, and it comes in numerous different shapes and sizes, but every single Quincy has one, and it is often where they draw their powers and create their spiritual weapons from. Of all the races in Bleach, the Quincy can be seen in many ways to be the most dangerous of them all. They absolutely dominate Reishi. They have total dominion over all Reishi in the atmosphere, Reishi being the spiritual particles that make up the spiritual worlds. As I mentioned, Quincy have total power and control over Reishi and can bend it entirely to their will, using it to fashion all manner of different weapons and abilities. And to a particularly powerful Quincy, there is basically no difference between their own Reiryoku, which is someone's innate power, and the Reishi around them, because it is all theirs to use as they choose. Because of this, when in a spiritual environment, a particularly powerful and skilled Quincy can have almost total control over that world around them. And unlike Shinigami, they absorb Reishi rather than emit it. The Quincy have always struck me as rather scrappy fighters. Obviously, they don't have that same durability, that same edge that the Shinigami have when it comes to battling hollows. And so they have a number of different techniques and moves and abilities available to them that they have built up over the years. Like I said, the primary form of combat for a Quincy is archery, using a bow and arrow to fight a hollow, and this was born out of a necessity to fight hollows at range. According to Uryu Ishida, the only Quincy weapon to even have a blade is the Sail Schneider, which in itself can still be used as an arrow. To move quickly, the Quincy have their own version of the Shinigami Shunpo known as Hirenkyaku, or at least that's the name given to it by the Ishida family anyway. To perform Hirenkyaku, a Quincy simply generates Reishi platforms beneath their feet, which they effectively hover on, and then use those to move incredibly quickly, riding those platforms to move at a speed equal to that of a Shinigami Shunpo, although some Quincy believe it to be superior. Meanwhile, Quincy have their own variation on the Shinigami's Kido, effectively magical spells, known as Jinto. Jinto are tiny silver tubes within which Quincy store some of their Reiryoku for use later on. By either launching their Jinto or utilizing them and the energy stored within in all manner of different rituals, Quincy are able to perform spells of their own with differing abilities. A couple of spells spells we actually get to see include High Zen, which destroys anything within the vicinity of 4 Jinto together, Grits, which is a defensive spell where someone flings a Jinto and from it forms a massive shroud designed to envelop the enemy, and one of my personal favourites, Sprenger, where basically 5 sail Schneiders are lined up in the shape of a pentagon, and then a massive explosion is initiated with a single drop of Ryoryoku from a Jinto. And then there are some even rarer Quincy techniques as well. For example, Ranso Tengai, where a Quincy who is beaten to the point where their body can no longer move is able to continue fighting by attaching strings of reishi to themselves and moving them as though they were a marionette. A Quincy's ultimate technique is the Quincy Let Still, activated with the removal of the Sanrei glove after intense training and pushing one's body to the limit. By breaking the Sanrei glove and activating this ultimate power, a Quincy for a very brief amount of time gains an angelic form, which gives them utter and total domination over all reishi around them. We even get to see when Uryu Ishida uses this fabled power in the Soul Society arc, he's able to strip nearby buildings down to absolute nothingness simply by being near them, drawing their reishi towards him without having to do anything. In this form, a single arrow, which is formed from that reishi he continuously collects, has enough power to not only destroy a Bankai in a single hit, but very nearly kill its wielder as well. Of course, the massive and critical weakness of the Quincy Let Still is that once it's been used, eventually that Quincy will have all of their powers sealed. If the Quincy were able to master and complete this ability, I imagine it would be extraordinarily dangerous. If we look at the history of the Quincy as it's presented in the Bleach story up until the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, we can see that they were a race of spiritually aware beings who were scattered all over the world at one point. Their presence was very well known throughout. The most ancient Quincy ancestors were known as magic hunters, and they've always been at war against the Hollows. 200 years prior to the main storyline, the Quincy were getting out of control. Their numbers were spiraling as more and more took to the fight against the Hollows. However, as we've already discussed, their method for destroying the Hollows was leading to a serious imbalance within the world and threatened to destroy the very fabric of the universe itself. So the Shinigami took a diplomatic approach, meeting with the Quincy on numerous occasions to hold talks with them and to try and get them to peacefully stand down and cease their operations. But the Quincy would never hear it, believing that it was their right to protect their people, other humans, and destroy Hollows by wiping them from the face of the earth. And so, 200 years prior to the main storyline, the Quincy Massacre was carried out, where the Shinigami annihilated the Quincy race and almost wiping it out entirely. Many Quincy were killed at this point, leaving only really a few families left. During this peacetime, after the Quincy had been effectively annihilated, the Shinigami grew complacent and lazy when it came to dealing with Hollows, and would generally turn up pretty late after a Hollow had already begun its attack. One of the few remaining active Quincy was a man called Soken Ishida, the patriarch of the Ishida family, and someone who believed dearly in the Quincy's teachings. He taught his grandson Uryu Ishida that the Quincy were wrong in the way they approached the situation. He didn't say that they deserved the destruction they got, but he certainly said that they should have lent their ear to what the Shinigami were saying in order to prevent what happened. That being said, despite Soken's seemingly warm attitude towards the Shinigami, the same couldn't be said for how they regarded him. During the period of time where the Shinigami had grown complacent and didn't seem to be as bothered with patrolling and taking out the Hollows as they were originally, Soken approached the Shinigami, proposing that because he and the other very few remaining Quincy were living beings, they did exist in the human world and therefore were at ground zero when a Hollow attacked, they could kind of act as first responders, protecting the humans from the Hollow threat until the Shinigami arrived to purge it and send that Hollow on its way. The Shinigami, however, totally disregarded Soken's advice, Soken's proposition. This idea of Shinigami and Quincy working in harmony together could have been a reality, but the Shinigami totally cast him aside, effectively bitter from the brutal war that had just occurred, but also seeing the Quincy as weak, ineffective, and at this point, obsolete. Because of this, Soken was the first one to arrive on the scene when 5 massive hollows turned up, and of course, Soken was killed. Of course, the reality would become clearer later on that a certain Shinigami had actually ordered these ones to be purposefully late to the scene so that this Quincy could be killed, that Shinigami of course being the monstrous Mayuri Kurotsuchi who Uryu would later go up against. So even just from this, we can see that the shared history of the Shinigami and the Quincy is one wrought with tragedy, with miscommunication, and with aggression on both sides, where really no one is in the right. It seems like out of everyone, Soken Ishida was the one really pressing for peace between the two sides, well aware of what they could both achieve if they set aside their differences, and unfortunately, it was this thinking that got him killed. His son, Ryuken Ishida, while inheriting the powers of a Quincy, would turn his back on his own race, believing that there was no profit in what they did, while his son, Uryu Ishida, would take up the mantle of the Quincy from his grandfather and have an antagonistic view of the Shinigami for letting Soken die, despite proposing peace between them. Looking at the Ishida family within the story of Bleach, Uryu appears very early on in the Agent of the Shinigami arc, where he, like I said, holds this antagonistic view towards the Shinigami. He does mention that he felt the Quincy were probably in the wrong 200 years ago, but since then, the Shinigami have only made things worse between them and allowed his grandfather, his sensei, to die. Crushing some hollow bait, which is another Quincy-only item, which summons hollows to the nearby area en masse, Uryu challenges Ichigo, saying that he needs to prove to this substitute Shinigami that the Quincy are strong as well, but eventually the two end up working together to save the town. Now, Uryu is a very noble individual, and even though Rukia was once a Shinigami, he's also kind of become his friend, as Ichigo tries to integrate Uryu into their friendship group within the school after their first encounter, and once Rukia is attacked by Renji and Byakuya, Uryu tries to save her, only to be defeated and nearly killed. Later, Uryu, now having mastered the Sanrei glove, travels to the Soul Society with Ichigo and the others to try and rescue Rukia, and it's here that he battles Jirobo Ikanzaka, defeating him fairly easily, before taking on Mayuri Kurotsuchi in perhaps the most important battle of Uryu's entire time within the story. It's here that Uryu activates his Let Still power, breaking the Sanrei glove to attain absolute strength, and nearly kills Mayuri, but the captain manages to escape, and Uryu's powers begin to fade. It's in the Urankar arc where we are properly introduced to Ryuken Ishida outside of a flashback, where he reveals that despite not wanting them anymore, he has still retained his Quincy powers, and even calls himself the last Quincy. Despite this, Ryuken helps his son retrieve his lost Quincy powers, pushing him to the mental and physical limit of his own mind and body, before blasting him with an arrow 19mm to the right of his heart, therefore restoring his Quincy powers. Of course, Ryuken makes Uryu swear that in order to get his powers back, he won't align himself with the Shinigami ever again, but Uryu finds a little loophole around this. After Ichigo is effectively abandoned by the Soul Society, he claims that because Ichigo's just a substitute, he can still work with him regardless. Uryu travels with everybody else to Hueco Mundo to try and rescue Orihime, and goes through many of the same trials and tribulations that would bring their friendship group closer together. In the Lost Agent arc, now that Ichigo has lost his Shinigami powers, Uryu has taken over as the main person who deals with hollow threats in Karakura Town, except early on into the arc he is blindsided and attacked by Tsukishima and Ginjo, until right at the very end when he returns as a crucial ally of Ichigo in the final battle. And so I think that's pretty much everything you need to know about the Quincy going into the 1000-Year Blood War arc. An exhaustive look at the Quincy race as a whole, their history, the Ishida family, their techniques and abilities, and the story that the Ishidas have within the world of Bleach. What does the 1000-Year Blood War arc hold for the Quincy race? Well, we can assume quite a bit, but we'll have to wait until the anime comes out to find out for sure. Alright guys, but that's it for the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the Quincy in Bleach. Do you enjoy this race, and what is your favourite Quincy moment? Try and keep it as spoiler-free for anime-only viewers as possible. But until next time guys, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.